Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the r/Kollywood podcast. We are on episode 21. And first off, we'd like to thank all of you for sticking with us since we started our journey sometime last year. And, on behalf of the core team, we'd like to assure you that we are trying our best and we'll be back quite regularly this year with some exciting content. So, after our retro review from the last episode, we're going back again down memory lane, revisiting a film that uh, nearly to this day completes 25 years. And we're here to talk about Kandukondain Kandukondain, which completes 25 years. I have with me Pirate King, whom you might have heard in our most recent episodes. Hello, Pirate. How are you doing today?
Hey Tej, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks a lot for joining, Pirate. So, Kandukondain, 25 years. So, when did you watch it, Pirate? And, when you watched it for the first time, what did you think about it?
I watched it at home in a TV when I was very young. So I think this was for some reason I kind of always confuse it with Jeans or movies that have like family oriented stories back in the day. So when I watched it for the first time, I think I was expecting there to be a lot more like comedy. But then when I was young, because this was very serious and this had a lot of drama, I didn't appreciate it that much. So funny thing is, in 2012, I joined Rajiv Menon's screenwriting workshop for 3 days, and Alaipaide and Kandukondain Kandukondain were brought up. In fact, I think in one of those days, Rajiv Menon himself was there to talk about some of these films and how he made them, what was his inspiration, and all that. So it was only later on that I started to kind of really give both Arepaide and this movie like a shot again and rewatch it. And um, I think after seeing those, it's probably like very recently now for the podcast that I rewatched it again. So it's been an interesting journey of seeing this movie a couple of times and seeing how it stacks up. Yeah. How about yourself, Siege?
So for me, right? Okay, now again, it's one of my old geezer story times. So I actually watched this film in the cinema when it released back in 2000. Uh, I remember going into it. Admittedly, I mean, I had no interest. Let's be very honest. I mean, I was a kid when I saw it for the very first time. Sure, I think the songs were already quite a big hit back then, even before the film released. I kind of liked Ajit as well, but again, we're talking about an Ajit before he was Tala, right? So we're talking about Ajit from the time of
Mm-hmm.
Mugavari and so on. So probably that was my only sort of interest point in the movie. I couldn't care less about Tabu and Aishwarya Rai, to be very honest. But hey, that's maybe 12-year-old me talking, I guess. Um, and so we went to watch the film. I believe it was in Bangalore, if memory serves me right, and it was quite full because I think Rajiv Menon Vande, he kind of pulled a casting coup of sorts. I mean, see, Aishwarya Rai was in her peak popularity at that point. I mean, she had done Jeans and Tamil, but she was coming to Kandukondain straight after say Hum Dil De Chuke Sanam. And as a person who grew up in Bombay, that was like a big moment where she was thrust to national superstar. I mean, she was already always very popular, but think of it this way: like she was by far the biggest name in that cast. Then you had Tabu, who of course was quite popular. Mammootty, who we as in the Tamil cinema, Tamil movie watching audience who weren't really exposed to Malayalam cinema, weren't really exposed to the stardom that he enjoyed in Malayalam. But whatever exposure we've had of him in Tamil were in films like Talapati and so on. So having him was also a big deal. Then you had Ajit, who was fresh of the success of Mugavari. The film, of course, I think was shot before Mugavari, or I think simultaneously. So he was coming off a big success. The cast was quite stacked, and it wasn't what you would expect in a cast of this sort. You would think that there's going to be a proper masala movie targeted towards a broad audience, especially the youth and the family audience, with mix of comedy and action and the usual 90s stuff, right? But it was quite obvious this is a bit more of a drama. And at least for me, when I watched it for the first time, I thought it was and I'm not using this in a pejorative sense, I'm just telling you what I thought back then, right? I thought it was more
Mhm,
of a
mhm,
chick flick, right? It was a movie that was targeted towards women in some sense, right?
mhm.
And obviously, I liked the film for the individual moments, but obviously I was not the right target demographic, so it didn't really interest me all that much. Although the drama bits did work for me in parts. In subsequent years, when I rewatched this film, I realized how wrong I was, and it's just me maybe becoming older and maturing. And honestly, over the years, I've developed a strong appreciation for this film because I think it does so many things so well, and the way the juxtaposition of the two core character arcs, that of Tabu and that of Aishwarya Rai, I think the way they compare and contrast to each other whilst traveling together, I think it worked quite well in my opinion. And not to mention that the songs and they still hold up to this day. Probably Rahman at his peak at that point. Really, I think it's one of those films that I have learned to appreciate a lot over the years.
Yeah, that's, I mean, like some of the stuff you talked about, the cast is really interesting for me because I'm trying to, like, knowing what I know about, like, how much time that process took for Rajiv to get all the actors because he went through like a whole Rolodex of people to try and get on the movie. Like, I remember it was supposed to be Prashant for Ajit
Yeah,
initially, and then he wanted to pair opposite Aishwarya Rai, so they couldn't do that. And then I think initially it wasn't even Aishwarya Rai. I think it was like Manju Warrior, Soundarya, Kausalya, and then it went to Aishwarya Rai
yeah,
because she knew Maniratnam. Therefore, like she also knew Rajiv, so she liked the script and she kind of jumped on. Um, yeah, like, and also like Mammootty, for example, was supposed to be Parthiban,
yeah.
but I think Parthiban wasn't getting along with Danu, so that was probably the reason why they had to go in with Mammootty instead. So it's like
Yeah.
I always am a firm believer in the idea that like making like the cast decisions when you write like the script like isn't always
Yeah.
going to work. Like
Yeah.
you have a general idea of who the person you're going to play these characters are going to be. So it's like it's really interesting like when we have the final cast and everything sort of settles like they kind of I feel like they kind of warmed up into those roles individually and you would never know from like all the casting troubles they went through early on.
It's a very interesting mix of people as well, right? It's you have a mix of like people from Tamil Nadu. You have, of course, Mammootty from Kerala, and then you have, I mean, Aishwarya Rai is technically from Mangalore, but for all practical purposes, she's from Bombay, right? And Tabu,
Hmm.
she's sort of from Andhra and from Hyderabad, but again, she's known more for her Hindi work than her Telugu work, right? So you have this
Hmm.
interesting bunch of characters or people, I should say, coming together to do this film. And personally, for me, I think they were perfect for that cast. But in general, Pirate, do you think the cast worked for this film?
I think one thing that kind of stands out to me a bit is, I mean, I really liked the characterization of Aishwarya Rai and all of that, but then like obviously when you know the meta context of it, and then like when you think of Aishwarya Rai's character being someone who appreciates like Tamil poetry and Tamil literature, and then you have someone like Abbas also having that same thing. I don't know. There's some part of it that's jarring and dissonant, and maybe because I mean Abbas, maybe, but even there, I don't know what it is, but it doesn't sort of give you that impression of these two are the people that would be so into Tamil and love Tamil and all of that. And I've always found that with like most of like Raja Menon's films, like there's a set of these actors who are like super high visible and who are really famous, who've done really good films, right? But then like I think the characters they portray um, are probably a little out of reach, and you have to spend a little bit of disbelief, and you have to suspend that in order to go in and enjoy the character and like go for what they're written as and what they're meant to be in the movie. So in that sense, those were probably my two standout characters that I, in terms of casting, that I couldn't really get into. But then once the movie kicks off, I mean, there's a certain point where that doesn't matter. Like when the third act like song kicks in with Aishwarya Rai, Yenge Enathu Kavidai, like I'm not thinking about that part anymore. It's only in those initial scenes where Abbas and Aishwarya are meeting in the balcony and they're talking about all this stuff like Bharatiyar Kavidaigal and all that. That's the part that hits me initially, but then later on I'm fully, immersed in the movie, and that kind of takes me. I'm completely in it for the whole thing, and I think apart from those two, I really like Tabu's subtlety and like a sort of contrast to like Aishwarya Rai's exuberant character, I think. And then Mammootty's also sort of like dignified performance of someone who's been in the war, who's seen stuff, and who really like doesn't think that he deserves a better life, and he's like kind of drinking himself to death. So there are all these like different things, and we can probably go into the story and characters there. So I really felt like all these characters did, and like you said with Ajit, like he has that sense of someone who has like drive and passion, but things are just not working for him, sort of. So Ajit really brings that to the fore in his character, and obviously all the other characters too. Like for example, Srividya played obviously her role really well. There was also the veteran actor Nambudri who played the grandfather. That character was small but great. Obviously, Manivannan brings in the humor from time to time. So yeah, I think in the stat cast they all kind of have their little roles and they play in. It's just one or two things here and there that don't click initially, but you kind of get used to, and it does click in at a later point. What about you?
See, you make a very interesting point, right? Like, I can see where you're coming from, but என்னோட மைண்ட்ல எப்படின்னா, I think I kind of view this story as a story of contrasts. Um, எப்படின்னா, see, you have someone like Tabu who has real issues in life. I'm not diminishing what Aishwarya goes through, but you'll understand in a second what I mean by that. So when I say real issues, she's the eldest person in the family. They have financial troubles. She's trying to run a school, and she's kind of the lead in the family. I mean, for all practical purposes, she is the dominant figure in the family. Then you have Aishwarya Rai. What's her name? Meenudan, I think her name is in the movie, if I remember.
Meenakshi. Mm-hmm.
Meenudan. So she's kind of living in her own sort of fantasy world, right? Which
Mm-hmm.
is full of poetry and song and music, and you kind of see that straight away with she gets an actual introduction song, right? That Konjam Mainakle and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Tabu doesn't get that at all.
Mm-hmm.
Like Tabu is just in the grind of life, and then you have Aishwarya Rai who gets the sort of a proper hero and intro song, and it kind of you every other scene you kind of see her in the first half at least that she's kind of living in her own sort of fantasy world. And the interesting thing is she's sort of Destiny's Child in many ways. Everything that she wishes, she gets it. I mean, she wants the appreciation of poetry. She wants to be loved and celebrated, and then she wants to find sort of a dream partner of sorts, right? And she gets all of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the interesting bit is that when you kind of take it into the second half, the tables turn completely. And by
Mm-hmm.
the time the movie ends, the person who gets the fairy tale ending is not sort of the person who started off with that story. It's actually Tabu who gets the fairy tale ending. She's the one who kind of gets together with this super or a famous director and a popular figure. While Aishwarya Vande, she becomes a reasonably popular singer, but then she chooses to essentially go with Mammootty, who is not such a visible person as such. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a choice that she doesn't go with her sort of dream partner, but she chooses the partner that she believes is ideal for her at that point in time. And to me, I think this particular sort of arc flipping, if you want to call it that, it works very well because of of this cast that you have. Because I can buy Aishwarya Rai and Abbas living in this sort of super fantasy world where everything is honey and milk, and I
Hmm.
can and then kind of stripping all of that apart. By the time you end the film, it kind of humanizes them quite nicely, I felt. Right. So I think under Vishuddhavande getting this cast was probably helpful.
Yeah, to be honest, that initial few moments of dissonance are like gone once you kind of really get into the characters and like
Yeah.
and the story of it. Like you said, the second half really hits, and then you don't think about these things anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think and overall, what did you think about sort of the themes in this film, by the way?
So what's interesting is that after the workshop, went through. So one of the things that I learned was, so this is like a really interesting sort of like how the idea of this film came together. So Raju Menon has said this in a couple of other places, but also in our workshop, he talked about like the genesis of idea was two things. One, it was sort of his own reflection of his relationship with his brother. So he's somebody who stepped into the world of cinema and he's now where he is, whereas his brother went for a more like academic route, and he was part of like a officer, like I think he's like a railway officer and stuff like that. So what I find interesting in this film is that even though Ajit and Mammootty are not brothers, there's a sense of their characters are more reflections of Rajiv Menon and his brother. And then the two sisters are actually something that Rajiv Menon wanted to adapt this story from Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. So he mentioned this. This was sort of meant to be like sort of like a pretty close adaptation of what that novels are, and you can see that because the way the story is laid out and the themes of it, I think very much reflect the that era of British culture where like the women are like slowly starting to like not play the roles that they're sort of positioned in, like be housewives or homemakers or stuff like that. There are women who are starting to become sort of like independent, and that theme fits really well with this sort of story where this is a family of women who manage their lives by themselves, no matter what the dire circumstances are. So all of that sort of really effectively translates into like a setting in India in Tamil Nadu, and it comes across really well. And you don't feel for a second that the setting is jarring or the way that these characters are behaving is jarring because the conflicts and the lives that are lived by the women seem global. So from that sense, like I think, yeah, I've had an opportunity to read that book and really reeling back into it. When you talked about the contrast in between the two sisters, yeah, like so like Tabu's the one with sense or wisdom, or this she underplays her emotions, so her arc is about to is meant to be someone who learns how to emote more, to give in to her emotions a bit and to not feel like she has to hold back on things. And then like you said, Aishwarya Rai's character is someone who's in this world of she wants everything today, like yesterday and tomorrow are just, you never know what happens, right? Everything is for today, and her idea is this is what I want. I'm more clear on what I want, and this is what I would like my life to be like. And like in the Sense and Sensibility book, I think in the third act, like the sister who's like Aishwarya Rai realizes that like even though her sister is someone who doesn't like emote very well or do who doesn't give into her emotions, she's also going through the same emotional baggage as she is, kind of leads to her realization. So something similar I feel happens in this as well, where like I think Aishwarya realizes like what's more important in her life and like who are the people who watch out for her. And yeah, it's a really interesting thing, and that's why I feel that this really feels like this has a story, and there are like character arcs, and these characters are well written, and I guess the reason is because they've taken these characters from that setting and transplanted them into this world. So part of that work is done, but there's still the work needed to ground it in our setting and our customs and our cultures, right? And I think that's like a really interesting thing that's done.
as
And
adaptations
yeah.
go, right? I think this is one of the
Hmm.
better adaptations of a literary classic in many ways. In Indian settings,
Hmm.
so because you don't get very many of them. And Hindi, you kind of get sort of Vishal Bhardwaj doing Shakespeare on and off with movies like Omkara and Haider and Makbul and so on.
Hmm.
But I don't think in Tamil cinema we adapt like Western or Western classics into or transpose that into an Indian setting. Of course, you can argue that there might be some commonalities and here and there, but I think this is one of those rare films where it's very evident what the inspiration is, and and Raji doesn't make any bones of it either. He's quite open about it, and it's very obvious as well. So, and it's adapted quite well, like you rightly said, right? Like the way they've transposed all of this from. I vaguely remember it was like some place in the home counties, Essex or Sussex. So I think Sussex or Conanigan, and then they end up in Devonshire, I think, in that
Hmm.
book, right? So it's interesting that you go from sort of this rural Tamil Nadu to Chennai, and you kind of, and yet you have the same sort of emotion and same sort of impact. That is, you go from something which is really big and uh, stable to something that is much smaller and not stable, even though the geographies they occupy are exactly the opposite compared to what the novel had, which I thought is an interesting it kind of, like you rightly said, right, the universality of the story kind of shines through in this film, which is, I think, a big success and also a big reason why it works. Good. So I think I guess one of the biggest strengths of this film, and one that I think elevates pretty much every scene that I can think of, is the music. Uh, Peak AR Rahman. I mean, we're talking about 2000 AR Rahman, like really smack in the middle of his sort of dream run from his debut until say 2010, 2011, right? But personally, I love all the songs. I think the score is also very solid. What did you think of the music, Pirate?
I mean, obviously, like when you think of Rajiv Menon's filmography coming off of Minsara Kanavu, you would think that like this was a bit more sort of underplayed or wasn't as effective. But when you forget about all of that, and even about like A.R. Rahman's filmography himself, I think when you just look at what the story needed and what and where these characters are and what the situations are, I think the songs just hit you like really well, and they're like a really great way to immerse. I think my favorite among all of them is Yenge and the Kavide. I think I really liked obviously how I'm thinking about it from like a visuals point of view, but also I think the visuals really strongly work only because of A.R. Rahman's like really amazing way to compose that scene and get everything in there together. And I think, yeah, I mean, this movie has also won like a national film award for Shankar Mahadevan. So the songs are, I still to this day sometimes listen to like all the songs. It's definitely not something that I go back to like classics like Roja or Sadal, but I definitely think that this is one of those like just like the movie, right? Because that's what I find fascinating about the music is as underplayed as the movie, and you don't necessarily think of like Kandukondain as like your go-to thing that you sometimes reach out to. It's one of those things where you have to be in a specific mood to listen to it, and I feel like the songs very much reflect that. How about you, Siege?
I think you pretty much captured whatever I thought as well. I think with one slight variance. Like for me personally, I listen to Kandukondain quite often. When I want to listen to something which is from that time period, particularly like Rahman from the late 90s 2000 period. Like this is one of my go-to albums. Although you are right that unlike say Minsara Kanave, or even if you take Alepar, the another film that came out same year a few months before, um, this one is not as obviously crowd pleasing, for lack of a better word. There's a lot of, like you said, they underplayed a lot. There's a lot of subtlety to it. It also leans in very, very hard into classical music. I think many of the songs. Like Kannambuchi Enada, I think
Mhm.
it does. Kandukondain Kandukondain also does. Of course, it's a little more westernized, but it still has like a classical root to it. Yenesolo Pogira is a very interesting one because I think they take a classical music, but then it's all instrument. The instrumentation is all very Western and very operatic, not operatic, orchestra. Maybe sort of the, you know what I mean, right? So like it's very very like symphony. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. It really leans in onto that symphony kind of vibe. The only song which I think is a bit of an outlier is that song with Ajit and Pooja Bada, Snaiya or something like that, right? That is a real outlier, but
Mhm.
again, that's like a situational song, so you kind of get it why it's there in the film. Purely in terms of showcasing like why Rahman, especially Rahman from that period, was like the goat, right? I mean, I
Mhm.
personally think this is a better highlight and more of an album that people who are deep into appreciating subtle nuances of music will appreciate more than say Minsara Kanavu. And to me, the one thing that gets seared in my head when anybody tells me about Kandukondain Kandukondain is that that shot where Ajit is in the cab, right, and he looks at Tabu
Mhm.
and then they play that na 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 dun, 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 and comes. It's a motif that plays out throughout the film, but when they played in this one,
Mhm.
especially with that, I think they use a violin if memory serves me right. I think it's just pure number Martin Tata meme da, in my opinion. So to me, I think that's why I think I have a bit of a bias towards this album. Really strong stuff.
And it's interesting about the music too. Like I think there are a lot of things that delayed this movie. Obviously, like Aishwarya Rai's films becoming a hit after she signed this movie when Hamdil De Chuke Sinam Tal came out, put
Yep.
a lot more of her films like that were in sleep into action. So
Yep.
she had to go and shoot those films as well. So that delayed it. And then I also heard that there was a delay in releasing this because Rajaman really wanted like A.R. Rahman to incorporate a lot more um, classical sounds into the songs
Yep.
that he had composed, which have apparently also delayed it. So yeah, I mean, I think like when you think of A.R. Rahman, there are like some films where he elevates the movie entirely. Like the
Yep.
movie is like in one place and then the songs
Yeah.
take it
Yeah.
to a
Yeah.
whole other level.
Yeah.
When he works with someone like Maniratnam, like they're kind of like it's like almost like a competition almost
Yep.
in terms of
Yep.
what it's you. And I feel like this movie is sort of like a horse before the cart type of stuff, right? Like so it's definitely like leading this film wherever
Yep.
uh the person is telling it to go. So that's how I see this movie as. Yeah.
Yeah, I think very well put. I think I like that analogy, and yeah, absolutely. I think it's a very perfect harmony in many ways, right, between what Rajay was trying to showcase and Rahman kind of saying, okay, just I'll take the lead, and you just kind of follow me, right? Right. I think
Agreed.
finally, Pirate, the $1 million question. 25 years ஆச்சு படம் வந்து. Obviously, a lot of our audience who are 2K kids, probably might have not even seen this film. I don't think even it's not very often showed on the usual suspects like Sun TV and KTV as well, right? So,
Mhm.
first off, why should anyone watch Kandukondain in 2025, especially if you have not watched it?
I'm just thinking about the type of films that come now where everything is about where everything is about like a larger than life self is kind of how I would describe movies of late, where like even when the characters like go through conflicts or they're trying to resolve things that are happening in their life, sometimes I think a tendency is to kind of make a point larger than like what they're going through. And like from those type of movies, it's really interesting to go back and deep dive and do these type of episodes where when you watch a movie like Kandukondain, it isn't trying to make like some sort of larger point about like how society should be or whatever. It could be culturally and like it's probably trying to make a statement in certain aspects of things, but it's not being overt. It's not being in your face, and you can enjoy a story for what it is without feeling like you have something else that's also kind of being messaged along. So there's definitely that aspect. I think that's something that comes to my mind. The second aspect is it's also those era of films where like family oriented films about families just going through issues and things are more common. And so someone who's watching movies today might get a movie now and then, but I think if they go back to this catalog of Tamil films that came out from like 2000s or maybe even a little bit beyond that to 2010, they'll find a lot more movies like this. A lot more movies about characters who have like ambition and desire and drive that isn't just about love or people who are connecting with each other because of their common mutual desires and not because of some attraction, and then later on realizing that there's more to that too, and like having this idea to fall in love with somebody because you understand who they are and what they've gone through. For example, those are all things that I think have been movies in the past, and I just wish like we get movies like that now and then between all the other movies that we get today. But yeah, I think that is the big reason why I think someone should watch it today if you are a Gen Z.
Very nicely put, Pirate. See, ultimately, why do we go and watch a film? I mean, we watch a film because the good films, right? What do they do very well? They focus on the journey of a character through a particular milieu, and it gets that character from point A to point B. That can be a physical journey, it can be a mental journey, it can be an emotional journey. So the point A, point B doesn't matter, but it's the journey of a character. Most films will have one aspect of that journey. What Kandukondain, in my opinion, does really well is you have so many characters here who are all going through their personal journey, either individually or collectively as a group, right? And I, as a viewer, independent of where I am in my life at that point in time when I watch this film, I can always, in my opinion, always find one character's journey in this film that I can always relate to and kind of get inspired by or get touched by in this movie. And to me, I think that's a big success of this film, where again it doesn't seem disjointed, it just goes in quite well. And that to me is one of the reasons why people should watch Kandukondain Kandukondain, along with all what you said, right? Absolutely. We don't get family movies anymore, we don't really get good solid romantic films as well, like romantic drama films which are rooted in real emotions at the same time with a cinematic touch to them. I think if you take both films from the same year, Alepayade and Kandukondain, they are romantic movies in some ways, but then they're not frivolous, or they're not kind of trying to portray something that is too detached from reality. The milieu, of course, and the staging and other bits has that cinematic quality to it, but that's because you're watching a movie, you're not watching a documentary. But the emotions that they showcase and the conflicts they showcase, with a touch of drama, are very rooted and very real, right? And we don't get stuff like that nowadays. It's also a wildly entertaining film in the sense that yes, it does not have action or comedy, or not not much in terms of comedy and stuff, but it's a very tight movie. I mean, everything goes quite well because there's so many characters going through so many different things, right? You never feel kind of lost. At the same time, every character kind of completes a journey by the end of the movie in some shape or form, good or bad, right? And I think it does a good
Mhm.
job of going and following these characters appropriately without it like falling apart and so on. So in terms of how do you use an ensemble cast and telling a story and kind of showcase their journeys together and in parallel, I think this is actually a very good example of that done well in Tamil cinema. So I think from a purely filmmaking perspective as well, or a writing perspective, it's worth a shot just to kind of appreciate it. And then, of course, you want to see peak Ajit, peak Aishwarya Rai, listen to peak Rahman music. I mean, what you get all of that in one film, man. Come on. I mean, you don't have to go watch three different movies. Just spend like 2.5, 3 hours, whatever the length of this movie is. And I believe you can find it on YouTube in many countries as well. So you can get all of that in for the price of one subscription, right? So
I think more that we talk in this particular thing, one observation that just strikes out to me. I think specifically, let's think just about like the writing, right? I feel like the kind of movies we're missing out on today are like movies that used to be back in the day, are movies where you could imagine a movie that you're watching. You can completely imagine that as something that is put on like a street theater drama. So take this movie, right? There isn't anything in this movie that you cannot probably translate into like a drama theater performance of like approximate length, because nothing in this movie is written or thought of with a finesse to like cinematic things or with like aspects to the actor or the star, right? So probably like unfair comparisons to make, but I'm just thinking like, for example, those are the type of movies that I feel that we are missing today, is that most of these films are made, I mean, that's not a bad thing. So most of these films that I think were the genre of films you're missing are like the type of like films like that K. Balachandar would make. And because he comes from like that drama theater background where characters are important, not the stars, he could have Rajni Kamal stars back in the day, and it wouldn't matter. They're playing these characters, right? Then you have like people like Visu, and then you have like films that come out like these that kind of fall along those same lines. And I think what you're getting today is a sense of everything is driven by the like the post production effects. So be it visual effects, be it any sort of thing that they would have to do after they shoot a film. Most films today, I feel, cannot be replicated into that like drama theatrical thing, because either it's too heavily edited, it's too probably like stylized, and they're all made with that intent to how it comes to the theater, right? Like what the films I think that we're missing today, I mean, those films are great, but then also the films that I think we're missing are just like simple character-driven drama stories that you can like you can probably put out with a group of people in some city. You can rent out a theater and you can run like a tour and have a series of shows of showing this story to different audiences and stuff. And I feel like this movie is very much in that category. You don't these characters don't have anything special that you just can't put in front of like a drama screen, and you can't have audience appreciating. So if yeah, that I think is definitely something that the 2025, if you're someone who's watching films fresh, you probably would have to discover that sort of genre of films that came out back in the day.
The other interesting thing, right, is it has the plot point of, or rather I should say it has the plot elements that could work in a stage drama, but it has none of the staginess of a stage drama, like Kandukondain, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you take a Balachandra film, right, and to some extent even a Visu film, they feel like they shot a drama for the big screen. Like literally feels big. The way the camera is placed, the way static camera, the locations are indoors on one in one house or one room. I mean, அந்த மாதிரிலாம் இருக்கும் அது. And
Mm-hmm.
that you don't see that. Uh, you don't see him taking advantage of the power of going beyond the stage in a lot of his films. At least his sort of the films that he's known for.
Yeah,
Whereas
absolutely.
whereas this one, it feels like Rajiv, and he really exploits the power of the filmmaking medium. Like there are some shots there that you can only do in cinema. You just can't imagine doing that in an indoor setting and so on, right? And to me, what you said, it kind of elevates the film even more in my eyes, because absolutely they take something which doesn't require that scale, but then they give that scale to it, and they
Mm-hmm.
make you appreciate why the filmmaking medium itself is an important medium of storytelling, and how it kind of differs from other media such as stage dramas or even the written word and so on. So I think this is a good example of why films should exist in a very meta way even. So yeah, that is our discussion on 25 years of Kandukondain Kandukondain. We hope you liked this episode, and of course, feel free to join us in the comments below. Share us your thoughts, your experience watching Kandukondain Kandukondain, and if you have any feedback for us in the podcast, feel free to share that as well. We love reading your feedback, and we are constantly trying to improve ourselves. And until the next episode of the r/Kollywood podcast, this is Pirate King and Seek signing off. Peace out.
Bye.
Shiva.